to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the Art Gallery of Peterborough is located on the Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaty First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Beausoleil, and Georgina First Nations Islands. The Art Gallery of Peterborough respectfully acknowledges that the Williams Treaty's First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. Joining me tonight are Lyn Carter and Dorothea Hines. Hines just happens to be our summer curatorial assistant, but is also a current PhD candidate at Trent University and a former student of Lyn Carter. And during these sort of, weird times, us, like I'm sure many of you, have been postponing certain things and revisiting other things. And one of the exhibitions that we found ourselves returning to quite often was Lyn Carter's solo exhibition, 11th Line, which was curated by Sarah Quinton, whom I think I see in the attendee list, and toured by the Textile Museum of Canada. So that really is going to be the focal point this evening, but also kind of a jumping off point. So Hines and Carter are going to discuss Carter's artistic practice, the significance of landscape within her work, the effects of digitization, and the challenges and advantages of rural art making, one of which is when it rains, sometimes the internet is spotty.
Very much, yeah.
Lyn is based near Grand Valley, Ontario. She works primarily in sculpture as well as drawing and has exhibited across Canada and the USA, Australia, Britain, Spain, Mexico, and China. Her work is represented in a number of permanent collections, among them the Albright Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo, USA, Cambridge Galleries in Cambridge, Ontario, and as AstraZeneca collection in Mississauga, Ontario, and the Dalhousie Art Gallery in Halifax, Nova Scotia. This evening, it is going to be sort of an interview style. So Dorothea is going to be engaging Lyn in a discussion about her work. We also want to make sure that your voice as the audience is present as well. So there will be ways for you to ask questions, and you're welcome to ask questions either in the chat or we are also very happy and willing to allow you to use your mic. If you just raise your hand, and we'll be able to see you, and we'll definitely allow for that to happen. It's nice to be able to have actual conversations. So please don't hesitate to indicate that you want to share. And thank you for bearing with us in this, we're all doing this, I guess, right? Thanks anyway. We'll navigate it together. So Lyn and Dorothea, I want to turn the table over to you, and I'll just help in the background.
Great, thanks, Finn.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I do want to clarify one thing that you said, Finn. When you said wave hand, that means there's a little button at the end of your screen or the bottom of your screen that you can virtual wave, because we can't see you. We can certainly hear you if you're willing to ask a question, or you can also type your question in, but it's totally up to you. So before I jump into my first question, I just wanted to give a brief outline of where this exhibition called 11th Line has been exhibited, just for people that don't have a history for this exhibition. So Finn mentioned that it was curated by Sarah Quinton at the Textile Museum of Canada, and that was from October to March 2016. And then after which it was exhibited at the Art Gallery of Peterborough from January to April 2017. And then from there, it was exhibited at the Musée d'Art Digitien in Quebec from February to May in 2018. So to start things off question-wise, I want to start with the title, so 11th Line. So it's my understanding that 11th Line was named after the road where you live and work in Southern Ontario. So I'd like you to tell me a little bit about this 11th Line, Lyn, and what specific aspects of the 11th Line are represented in your work.
Okay, well, I wonder if I should actually bring up some images at this point,
Please,
which might be good, just to, oh, where's my, okay, I'm gonna be a little, okay. Yeah, okay. So I'll be off to the side here. Not so prominent.
Perfect, perfect.
Anyway, yeah. Yeah, I live, as Finn mentioned, or just south of Grand Valley. It's about an hour and a half northwest of Toronto. I had been an urban person all my life until we moved up here. I guess 20 years ago. Oh my God, 20 years ago. And it was, the fact that, my husband and I, my partner, Carl Tayson, and I were both artists trying to make a go of it in Toronto, and the expenses of 2 studios and rent, it just got crazy. So we tried to stay as close as we could afford to Toronto. But anyway, 11th Line is actually in farm country. We are surrounded by working farm field. We live on a gravel road, and that is 11th Line. It's country, but it's a very managed country. Farm fields, the roads are lines and concessions, and they kind of crisscross, the landscape at on a grid. And and then there's 100-acre plots with 150-acre plots. We're actually a little acre and a half surrounded by the rest of a 50-acre worked field. And so, my journeys and my surroundings are, worked farm fields, farm buildings in the distance, certainly residential properties, but very much dominated by farmed fields. And I think one of the things you were mentioning, Dorothea, was how 11th Line and Stripes kind of come together. And of course, worked farm fields are worked in rows, as I said, it's a very managed landscape. So it's very much divided up, in stripes. So I'm literally physically within that kind of structure. So, so the title 11th Line actually came kind of after we got started. And in fact, I started by researching at the Textile Museum and kind of gravitating towards stripes as I looked through the collection. And when started to focus on that, then and we were searching for a title, Sarah and I, 11th Line suddenly appeared as a stripe. And so it kind of made sense that it became the title. Yeah, so
Absolutely. I'm picturing those. I'm picturing those aerial views of concessions and farmland, and the higher you get, the more module and the more just the same these rows get, and then it becomes just a stripe, just a stripe.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it's a landscape that's in between urban and wild. I mean, it is totally managed and organized and worked. So it actually isn't sort of this sort of, it's not a playground. It's not a playground so much. It is, as I used to think when I lived in the city, it's like you go out to the country and it's playground, but it's a very, it's a very worked surface. It's where nature and culture overlap, and are kind of the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I recall that one story that you mentioned, I think it was last week, how you had some friends from the city come up, and I think it was their child that just like threw a ball and like ran out into these fields. Yeah. Just like you saying, absolutely not, don't do that. So,
yeah, can't.
Like, you're right, it's completely managed, but it's also quite dangerous with all the farming equipment, depending on what field it is. So I think the way you describe it is very spot on. And as someone who lives in a very similar area, I can I completely agree.
Yeah, yeah, it's a real adjustment, but you know, I love it. I love, it's a beautiful atmosphere to be, or a beautiful surrounding to be embedded in anyway. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
I love
obviously
it as
starting
well.
to feed my work.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could, the image that's up right now, could you talk a little bit about, I guess, the 11th line and how it kind of manifests within your individual sculptures in this, the one image here?
Yeah, it's like I said, living where I do, I mean, I'm often in a car. I'm often traveling down
Mhm.
roads and seeing farm buildings in the distance. And you know, I mean, I look at this landscape also through artist eyes and with an art, you know, an understanding of art history. And like for me, the farm buildings are very much these beautiful pared down forms that are straight ahead, functional, but just very clean lines. I mean, it's almost like being in a minimalist sculpture in a way. And,
Mhm.
you know, amongst this, you know, like in the distance, always in the distance. So the pieces you see in the image, the one at the foreground is called Field. And so it is, I mean, if you think of buildings that are farm buildings, you can think of drive sheds and barns and outbuildings and storage silos and things like that. You know, again, they're very kind of pared down geometric shapes. So,
Mhm.
so the piece in the foreground is called Field, and because it's so low, you're kind of looking over it. When you stand at the edge of it, you're kind of immersed in a way in that field of stripes. And not unlike the way you're drawn into the sort of, you know, the field of corn or the field, like, you know, the stripes are kind of, you know, kind of are a bit magnet like. And then
Mhm.
in the far distance, just beyond that, you see skew, which is a form that is kind of a forced perspective. So the form diminishes and at one end is quite small and the other end is kind of just above waist height when you're standing near it. And you know, like I said, where I live, you're seeing a lot of parallel lines that, you know, that are kind of like 1 point perspective. You're constantly kind of seeing these, you know, these roads go down to 1 point, and you see, you know, things in the landscape operate similarly. So, or buildings in the landscape operate similarly. So that's kind of where
Mhm.
that came from. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Do you mind scrolling down to that second image?
Oh, yeah. Yes. So this gives you a sense
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you can really see the perspective on this one. I really love the shot.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Mm.
and like I said, these are large pieces. I think I have one further down with a person in it, so you can get a sense of that better. But
Mm.
they do sort of they do open up in front of you. They do roll out from the body of the viewer. And, you know, I'm also very much thinking about the body of the viewer as much as I'm thinking of the landscape that it inspires these pieces. I mean, I'm thinking about all these spaces, the space of the rural space, but also the space of the gallery, and also
Mhm.
the physicality of the person, you know, coming into these spaces and moving around in the gallery. So those scales,
Mhm.
the way they overlap and the way that, you know, they're felt is something that's really important to me.
Mhm. Yeah, and for those that either haven't been at the AGP in a while or have never been, so what you see in front of you is, I would, almost half of the gallery, if not half of the gallery. So when she
Right.
says this is a large, it is indeed a large piece that takes up a lot of space, and you do have to walk around, which is similar to, like, I definitely think of like walking around like the concessions and farm fields. Like, it takes up a lot of space. It's very
Right.
vast.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, and also you know,
Mhm.
I was going to say, I don't know how much we're we're following the questions, but you know, one of the
It's
things
okay.
you talked about, you know, later on is that you know, this this exhibition very much grew out of also the space of the Textile Museum of Canada, which is a very particular space where you move from room to room. And it also is a museum where you're often looking at textiles. You're often looking at things on the wall. Sculpture is not so much something that's encountered. And so I was really excited about being able to deal with that space and kind of create things that kind of almost outgrew the space. When it came to the the AGP, it's funny, we were able to move things around so that it felt like it was a glove fit, like it felt really wonderful. The show was not, it turned out, not contingent on the space in which I had originally designed it for. And these pieces found their way into that space beautifully. Of course, we had a lot of work to work with, and we didn't use it all in this in the Peterborough incarnation, but it felt equally kind of like a conversation between the work.
Yeah, I was. Sorry, I sometimes feel like you're lagging a little bit, so I hope I'm not. I hope you don't feel like I'm talking over you.
Oh no!
If that happens, it's yeah. So I sadly wasn't able to see it at the Textile Museum, but for those that don't know, Textile Museum is in Toronto. So based on that first question I asked and your description of the 11th line, it's very, very clear that this work is site specific, and it's very connected to your experience with the landscape of 11th line. And one of the things that seeing the exhibition images or the work installed at the Textile Museum, as well as the work installed at the AGP, one thing that came up was how specifically, how you designed this exhibition for the Textile Museum space. And you mentioned that it was a very specific space, but you also were able, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you were also able to have selected works from their permanent collection, specifically works that highlighted the cultural expression of landscapes through textiles and textile practices. So I'm wondering what that experience was like, choosing the works that you wanted to include from the Textile Museum permanent collection, and then how your work in conversation with that work contributed to this history of cultural expression of textiles and landscape.
Oh, okay. That's a lot, Dorothea. Anyway, yes.
How do you do it?
Anyway, here's an image of the work, actually, one of the pieces called Rise in the Textile Museum space. And here's Skew jutting from one room to another. And you can see the textiles from the permanent collection up with the work. Well, of course, I started by researching at the Textile Museum, and it's such an amazing, extensive collection that the museum has. It was hard to choose which direction to go in, and but one of the things that did come up again and again as I looked through pieces from so many different cultures was the stripe. And the thing that I love about it is its, its ubiquitousness. It's like the fact that it is so cross-cultural, and its abstraction. I'm very attracted to abstraction, and that it also made me think about, abstract painting, modernist abstract painting. It made me think of like Agnes Martin, Anne Truitt, Kenneth Nolan, and so all these sort of greats of the modernist era, and minimalism, and so I felt it tugged at both my art background, but it also, you know, again, started to reflect where I lived. So it seemed like a natural fit. And what I love in the exhibition at the Textile Museum is also that it's, all my work is black and white, and all the permanent collection, the pieces from the permanent collection are color. So I like that flip. Like I was sort of following, in a sense, these pieces. And just to show you how I start was often just in terms of space, I start by building a model of the space. And the Textile Museum, as I said, is a fairly complicated space. And you can see that I'm, you know, I'm kind of like, I'm really squeezing these pieces in. This is all the models of the various to scale. So I'm working to scale. I'm always amazed at how you can work at the small scale, and when you scale it up, it actually does what it's supposed to do, which I love.
Translates.
Yeah. So here,
do these models have cloths?
Do they have what?
Do they have the cloth that's on them?
They have.
Are you working with cloth?
Photographs of, are there digital renderings of the pieces that I was looking at, and in the model form, it's you know, it's kind of trying to figure out how the conversation operates, you know, and where they might sit in the space along with the work. So I was able to scale them similarly to the buildings, and you can see there's the little person in there that gives you the sense of you know, how big everything is. So it's yeah, so I think with Sarah then, you know, came up with some other possibilities before we started the show, and so it got refined a little bit more, which was great. And but in the end, you know, there was a real conversation that happened between these works and these historic works. I think what perhaps my work can bring to that conversation is the fact that I'm this surfacing that I'm making, these stripes that I'm making, I'm actually, you know, I'm going to sort of jump all over the place here a bit. I'm actually,
yeah, that's fine.
I'm actually drawing them so on paper, and I'm using art materials. So many of the pieces I looked at the Textile Museum were woven, you know, and stripes are kind of the rudimentary patterning especially in woven textiles, because they follow the warp and weft, they follow the structure of the cloth. And, you know, for me, I'm imposing images on the cloth. And so you can see here, this is Stand, the piece is called Stand. And then there's the two drawings that I did that were scanned and then enlarged and printed on the fabric that I used to make the piece. You know, what's great about that is, like I said, I'm starting with art materials. I'm working with charcoal, I'm working with India ink, watercolor, you know, very, very traditional materials associated with art making. And kind of interestingly, also associated with the messiness of art making. You know, there's this sort of mystique about the artist, like sort of, you know, immersed in this messy kind of maelstrom of activity. And, you know, those that, you know, work in medias that may be considered more craft oriented are kind of, you know, off to the side because, you know, it's so careful and so managed. And I thought what was great about this, you know, by digitally scanning these, the mess of art making is kind of, you know, captured. But then you're still, you know, and you sort of think the mess of charcoal and fabric, it's like, you can't put those two things together. But, you know, I mean, here, you know, it captures all the strokes. It's, you know, it's really amazing now what, you know, what you've got available to you. So Yeah, so these, these pieces, I hope, bring together cross a lot of barriers, bring a lot of things up against each other, conflate a lot of differences between
Definitely.
the domestic and the art realm, and the hand and digital, the art and craft, all of these things kind of roll in together in these pieces.
Yeah, and definitely when you were talking about like the messiness of the material, if you look, yeah, this is a really great example here. You've got the charcoal drawing that extends from the stripe, but you really don't see that unless you're close up. So there's this wonderful balance between like this modular, very clean and precise stripe, which is kind of a pure design thing. And then when you look close, it's the messiness and the more of the artistic gesture, I'll call it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the materiality of those media, are just, again, are kind of felts, even though, it's not, you're not going to touch it and smear something. So, but it is, those smears are, are in the mix.
Definitely,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was also thinking when you're talking about having these different worlds, so you've got the digital and the handmade or crafting world. You've got that precision versus the messiness. In terms of your own education, like your artistic education, you also have this wonderful blending of sculpture, drawing, and textiles. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you see the relationship between these like multimedia, multimedium.
Yeah, so I kind of hover between fine art and craft, and using these different medias, I kind of like being in that outsider role a bit, I guess. And even in the 11th line, there was also video. There was a video that I worked on with artist Sigrun Hadidottir, who's an Icelandic artist, and we actually filmed in Iceland for that piece. She's more the video artist, but we collaborated on the piece in both, in Iceland.
Yeah, that's available on your website. Is that right, Lyn? I have seen it before. Is it available on your website? In case anyone wants
it will be. It's not there yet.
Okay, excellent. Yeah.
It's not there yet. I have to figure all that out.
We'll include it in the show notes.
It will be.
It is a really good video.
Yeah, it's really quite beautiful, and again, it has, with each of these media, you can explore these phenomena in such different ways. I mean, of course, with video, you're working with time, but with drawing, you're working with the illusionary space on a surface, and then with sculpture, of course, you're working with real space, and the way you move around, and the scale of the body, the scale of body of the viewer, the scale of in sort of collaboration with the scale of the space in which it's shown, and the scale of the artwork. And so it's very sort of full sensory, it's felt. It's the thing I really love about working three-dimensionally. And I mean, and interestingly, I mean, I really came at sculpture as you mentioned. I started at the Ontario College of Art by studying textile design, or kind of gravitated to textiles and did textile design, and was by all means going to become a textile designer. But I was, I don't know, I was just too drawn to three-dimensional. And then I guess from then on in, it was like, wow, how do you make this floppy thing operate in 3 dimensions? And it was kind of like, that's kind of how I've been, because I love the material. I love working with that material, but I've worked with other materials. I've worked with bronze, I've worked with plaster, I've worked with a number of different materials, but I keep coming back to textiles. And I think it's because for me, my first sort of sculptural experience was making clothes for my like Barbie doll equivalents, because I grew up in England, they didn't have Barbie dolls, but yeah. And, you know, really understanding that that clothing is constructed in a very sculptural way. It actually, you know, the body is kind of the armature for these hollow forms that are, you know, fitted in on angles, and, you know, there. And once you start to see it that way, it's no longer, you know, clothing and then sculpture. It is just sculpture. And
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
so I did include this image of Cristobal Balenciaga's piece from the 60s, I think. And that shows you how, like, for me, there's plenty of fashion designers that think sculpturally. I mean, you think of Jean-Paul Gaultier or Issey Miyake. I mean, there is, you know, there's a lot of artists in the fashion realm that are working three-dimensionally. So for me, it was, it's kind of a natural fit. You know, and then because of textile design, you know, bringing the surface, you know, being able to work. Well, actually, this is the first show in which I've actually created the textiles for the forms that I'm working with. So that was new. And, you know, a great part of the whole journey of this. But yeah, it was, you know, kind of drawing on my old textile design days. Yeah.
Yeah. When you say you created the textiles for your services, you're talking about drawing on the fabric itself and designing, creating the. And then can you describe it a little bit more for me?
Okay, so actually maybe I'll go back to stand. So I actually, you know, those little models that I showed you before, so they were to scale. So I, you know, they kind of fold out to a flat pattern. You know, those little, where are they?
Yeah, I think you had one framed for.
Yeah, and I've shown them, as well as, I mean, all of those pieces that are framed were the drawings that I did as a precursors for these pieces. But so all of these are folded, you know, paper. So they fold out into a flat pattern. And then it was doing drawings that are for those flat patterns, as large as I could make them, to be scanned. And then they were scanned, like high resolution scanned. And then there is a textile company in Mississauga that will digitally print those images, and can even enlarge further, which they did for me, onto, in this case, they were mostly, it was like a synthetic poplin. It was, and then create them you know, luckily they had like 10-foot wide fabric, so they could do, you know, I kind of pushed it as far as I, like size-wise, as far as I could. And then, but you know, originally I'm working in like India ink. So even when you're looking at something like skew or field here, skew was made actually with snap lines. You know, the snap lines that you use in when you're in construction.
Leveling?
Making lines.
Yes, yeah, with the chalk, yeah, a level, yeah.
Who knew? Yeah. The snap lines came in all different colors.
Yeah,
so,
I believe it.
I was able to get snap lines.
They have lasers now, I recently discovered.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then, so the drawing you see behind here in the back, that one is the original drawing, so done with snap lines. And then that was taken to the scanning place. They scanned it, made these high resolution, and that was taken to the fabric printing place, and they printed it at this enlarged scale on the fabric. Yeah. And so
I know with any tool, any medium, it comes with limitations and then affordances. So I'm thinking about you taking your design to this printer, and in terms of the dimensionality, like, were you restricted based on the print that you had access to the size of the sculpture that you were created for this exhibition?
Yeah, there's definitely limits size-wise. So I could only go so big with the drawings, and I could only go so big with the print, but it was still pretty big. Big enough.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. So,
um, yeah.
uh,
But you know,
we're
digital is not something like, what can I say? It's not like some sort of super fancy thing. It's just a tool.
yeah,
It's just like
absolutely.
another tool. And you know, like in my rural area, you know, the farmers use GPS to guide the planting of the crops. It's a great tool. You know, it helps you go faster, you know, get things done better. That's really the same. That's how I feel about digital processes. They're just, you know, they're one of many tools, and they're very useful. But I think they're most interesting in combination with hand work. I think that that is actually because, you know, you get a kind of, I think you get more nuance.
Definitely, yeah. Specifically with the works that you included in this exhibition, it really showed a blend between hand, you physically going in and crafting, and then this implementation of the digital and the scanning and the printing. I specifically like how most of your sculptures, if not all of them, have the farther you get, the more modular and the more digitized they see. The closer you get, and I think you have there's this one image of. I can't remember which sculpture it was, but it showcased one of the Indian ink stripes.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Or no, actually, this.
Yeah, that's it there.
Yeah, that's bunker, and that's actually watercolor.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other thing is when I'm actually doing these or painting these on the paper, you know, which is then picked up, scanned, you know, I'm like painting the edges. So those edges are like a hand line rather than, you know, it's not masked off or anything like that.
Very impressive.
So yeah. Not that I'm trying. Yeah. Okay.
Because from a distance, kind of, it really looks like a perfect line. It looks a perfect line from a distance.
Yeah. But when you get up close, you can see the hand, and, you know, and of course also because it's enlarged, you actually do see it, you know, you can see it that much more, or you can feel it that much more. Yeah. You know, you can see on here, you can see the charcoal and the sort of breaking off of the charcoal when lines are being made, or, you know, this is another part.
There's that messiness.
Yeah. The messiness. Yeah. So, yeah. And again, you know, then it's enlarged. So it's just that much more kind of exposed, perhaps.
Evident. Yeah. One term I came across when I was researching these questions, and I want your thoughts on it, was textile architecture.
Oh, yeah.
Would you describe this as textile architecture?
I think architecture is definitely in the mix. You know, I was you know, thinking about, I think you had kind of asked me that question in regard to the essay that Peter Legree had written, and he talked about also clothing. So yeah,
I want to talk to you about that too.
Definitely artists like architects like Frey Otto, who, you know, worked with tensile structures. There's a lot of, you know, fabulous buildings made with, and even in farm country, a lot of our, you know, now sort of outbuildings are made with, you know, textile over steel structures, tensile. Yeah. And so definitely textiles are very much a tool of architecture. But, you know, in the mid 80s, I actually got a Canada Council grant to study historic women's underwear. Everything from sort of, here you can sort of see everything from, so the kind of structures worn on the body that would support this almost architecture that was built on the body. So from the Elizabethan period right through to the Victorian, like early 1900s, things like farthingales. And so you've got a farthingale, which is the structure underneath those dresses, corsets, the boning that goes into them. So I looked at everything from an iron corset. And this was to go to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And I had 6 appointments over 6 weeks where I would, they would pull out the items that I wanted to look at, and they would have them ready when I got there. And I saw everything from an iron corset from the Elizabethan period through, 17th century corsets. And I think they did have a farthingale. It certainly had crinolines from the Victorian period. There was an early 1800s. So it was like this incredible array of structures. and they definitely have made my way into my work. So, so in the,
very different from, go right ahead. Yeah, I love this one, quick turn.
Yeah, so I was going to say,
keep talking.
Relationship, right?
Yes, please,
the body, and also architecture, and also those structures. Quick Turn 1 and 2 that are in, that we're in all 3 exhibitions, versions of 11th Line. We're kind of, came from a series that I was doing just previous to that, where I had discovered that I could draw a silhouette, and then I could calculate the pattern needed to be able to sew it together in the round. So this, these 2 pieces started with a sort of scooped line that I created, and then so the silhouette is really important, the way it holds space, the way it fingers into space, and and then there's 24 pattern pieces that are sewn together that actually create that in the round. And so the textile itself is structural. So it actually is kind of an architectural, I'd say, construction. And in conjunction with the hoops that are inserted in this, there's no other structure than that. There's just the hoops and the cut of the cloth, and that's what structures the piece. So it is, so they're entirely hollow.
And for those that don't know, they're hand sewn as well. I just want to throw that out there.
No, well, they're mostly machine sewn.
Mostly. Oh, are they? I thought some of them are hand sewn, are they not?
No, the last seam is hand sewn, but all of it is machine sewn other than that. Yeah. Yeah, they need that strength of the machine. And because they're under tension. Yeah. And that's a kind of, in the way that, like I said, coming back through sculpture to clothing, I mean, the great thing that happens when you're working with textiles 3-dimensionally is what happens along the seam line, and here these stripes, they match up, and so they become chevrons. And so where do I have that? So in, let's say at the Textile Museum, Rise, which when you look at it from one angle is just these chevrons that we talked about optical illusion, that start to kind of mess with that actual volume. So here's it from the side, and then here's it, from one end, and those lines along the seam line start to kind of conflate or confuse, complicate what we're looking at.
Yeah, I think in that one article that you referenced, Peter Legree, he talks about it as paradoxically so vivid, but at the same time it kind of throws you for a loop. They're very drawing on optical illusions.
Yeah, and you really feel that when you're looking out over over fields. Yeah, it's got that kind of, you know, because you're working with stripes that are equal width, you know, they fight for dominance and in optically, and you get that, you know, you get that flutter when you're looking at it. And again, I like what, you know, if you were just looking at this as a plain form, it would be, I think, just a model. You would feel it as a model of something you might see in the landscape. But when you see it with this patterning on it, it is more confounding, and you actually kind of, you know, is it clothing, is it building, is it, you know, is it, you know, it suddenly becomes many things. And you know, and then you have this effect, you know, when you're looking at it, that is that reflects that confusion. So yeah.
Definitely. I want to, I'm just very mindful of our time at this point, but I want to go back to one thing that you said with the Quick Turn 1 and Quick Turn 2. So
Okay.
I know in 2007 you did Beacon at the
I'll bring Beacon up. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely get a picture there. So they're very similar structures, but the size is much different, and it feels a lot, one, because of the size, and two, because of the color as well.
Yeah, so with Beacon, you know, I was given the opportunity to try out something. This is their kind of project space at Cambridge Galleries. I was given the opportunity to try out something at a large scale in a space that you see from both inside and outside. So that was a great challenge. And so again, you know, you have the opportunity, so you decide to try something big. What I hadn't quite calculated at that point, because this kind of working, this way of working was new to me, is how much gravity would kind of operate in this situation. So something that was supposed to be 18 feet high ended up being like 24 feet high or 26 feet high. So it really, you know, I just remember we installed it that day, and the curator, Iga Yannick, kind of went, okay, we'll have to come back to this. So it was, you know, there was a lot of finagling to get it higher up. And, but, you know, the color I chose, which was, you know, right on the edge of yellow and green. So in the daylight, it's more greenish, but at night, when the daylight dies down and it's more lit by interior lights, it becomes golden. So it has this, you know, it operates differently, sure, from the stripes, but it's still, the color and that surface has a huge impact on how it's. My favorite story from this piece is that Cambridge Galleries has a library on one side and the gallery on another. And the people in the, when this went up, I guess it was the first week, the people in the gallery, in the library, phoned over to the gallery, and they said, you know, I just heard two little boys talking, and one little boy was saying to the other, you know, in the spring, butterflies are going to come out of that. So it was like really so cute. He saw it as a Christmas. It was so cute. Anyway, so but anyway, it's yeah, that coloration, the surface actually works into the mix in an interesting way.
Is it translucent? It definitely has a translucent quality, but I'm not sure if that's because of the light coming in, or if it's because of
yeah, I mean, it's not, it's, I mean, it's an opaque fabric. It's really, it's nylon. I mean, it's, you know, ripstop nylon kind of material. So it's, yeah, it's, so if you think of, you know, ripstop nylon, there's a little bit of translucency to it. Yeah, a little bit. So I'm trying to think if there's anything we haven't looked at. I don't think so.
Yeah, you added some of those models in there. They were great to see, and how you also play a little bit of sculptures in space. You play a little bit of that curatorial role and how these sculptures can respond to that space, which really speaks to how mindful you are of where the site specificity, how important that is for your sculptures.
Yeah.
Oh, I see one image there. I'm very curious, and this is something that I really enjoyed of your sculptures. So most of them are specifically Beacon, because the image is right there. The fabric wraps around the entire structure. For a lot of your other works, they ruffle, for lack of a better word, at the bottom. So I'm wondering if you could say about that.
So yeah, so if you're
Yes, I
thinking
love
of
that.
like, yeah, something like, so yeah, marker, this is marker, and in the 11th line shown, and it's a little different in that it's not digitally printed. It actually is hand painted silk. And it's painted with India ink and soy milk. It was Gwen Stedman at in the textile program at Sheridan. She had done a workshop over in Japan with this technique, and I asked her, I set up lines on the silk. I set it all up and asked her to paint it. Had commissioned her to paint it for me. So it has this very, what can I say, more evocative line that is much more wandering. And I just to let you know, on all of the pieces in 11th line, they aren't just fabric over a box. They are actually, the structures inside are created or structured so that the fabric itself is the skin. It's just the top that it holds, but then it falls shy or outside of any kind of hard structure. So in the case of this one, the fabric sits out about an inch from the column inside that's holding it up. And so what you see, what you feel is the softness of that. So in any of them, actually, you know, like even this double peak here, or oh, there's double peak, or this actually is a cross piece. Like there's a cross piece in it, so the wood actually hits the edges, but it's the fabric that defines the surface. So if I was to just cut these off at the ground, which I guess I hadn't figured out until I actually made them, it would feel like a painted box. But because,
Right.
you know, when it moves, actually does that, it moves onto the floor, there's a little bit more of, what can I say? There's a little bit more of the materiality that is at the surface. So it's really, it just highlights, it animates, you know, and then also this kind of really animates the piece. It makes you very aware.
Yeah, that's one of my
favorite reality. Yeah.
We do have a request to view slide 24 again.
Oh, okay. All right. That one.
Yeah. And there wasn't a specific question that came along with it, but I wonder if it was sort of relevant to that moment when you were speaking.
Yeah, so the same here. Yeah, I just felt, you know, again, I wasn't originally thinking about how this happened, but, you know, it came to the point where the pieces were clothing the structures, and then it was okay, you know, because my idea was just to cut it off. But then it just felt like I was kind of you're disabling the piece in a way by doing that, because then you can't see, you kind of, you know, then it just becomes this sort of hard surface. The softness you know, is kind of maintained by doing this somehow. And you know, yeah.
Yeah, so Erin is saying it feels rooted because of that. In this way, it feels really rooted.
I think so. Yeah, I think it is. And it just, you know, the textile nature of it is just that much more enhanced. I mean, when I put this piece on, when I put this on the structure, it sort of shimmied down and did this like ruffle at the bottom. And then I just went, okay, that's it. You know, it kind of made itself. And so it was, there was, you know, it suddenly kind of made the piece more human somehow.
Yeah, for me, it's we just had another comment from Linda here. These volumes feel inhabited.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I hope so. And you know,
Yeah.
as Peter pointed out in his essay, I mean, there is also these are buildings with no doors, so you can't get inside. You
Mm,
know, you're always aware of the surface of outside. You know, of like they're impenetrable, but you can imagine the inside. Like there's a sort of, yeah. So they are. You know, in that way, they're kind of like minimalist forms. They are, you know, they are just those forms. They are, you know, they're not necessarily working models of, you know, of something. They
mhm.
are more reduced than that.
Yeah, but I think these moments of ruffle or folding onto the floor, not only can you imagine it, but they invite you to actually think about the inside, think about the armature, or what
Okay,
could,
good.
yeah,
Good.
that was my sense.
I'm happy
Yeah,
about that.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So I'm mindful of the time right now. So right at 8 o'clock, I'm wondering any specific
And I seem
questions.
that
Oh,
my light is like diminishing, but anyway.
Yeah, why don't we just, I'll fill up a bit of time with a bit of business, and we'll create some space as well for all of those who are in attendance to ask some additional questions or make a comment if you need. I did want to, of course, take some time to thank the funders. So the Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, of course, the City of Peterborough, and all of our volunteers and staff, and of course the audience, but the artists who help us do what we do. It's a real pleasure and a joy to be, I guess, enough of a strong institution that we can, you know, work together to figure out how to do these different things. I did want to just remind everybody to please come to the Art Gallery of Peterborough now that we are open again. We have new shows. Those in the main gallery will be up until November 8th. And then everything else on the ramp. So we've got Sasha Opico, 217, and we also have Locked in Away by two local artists, Matthew Hayes and Victoria Moore Blakeney on the ramps. So yeah, come book your appointment. Super easy. Just give us a buzz and we'll set you up. Wanted to give, it's weird. We installed a show. I haven't even seen the new show yet because I wasn't able to complete the install. Had to go into isolation to do a COVID test, but I wanted to take a chance actually to thank the install crew and everybody who helped make that happen. Dorothea, of course, who was one of those. So thanks to you guys. It's strange to not be able to acknowledge those things and share and celebrate. So just wanted to take a little bit of time here to do that. And as of right now, I don't see any additional questions or comments from the floor. So I'll just leave it to you, Dorothea, and oh, thanks, Sarah. Sarah Quinton is here and passed along. Thanks for such a generous evening. Glad to revisit. We are so thrilled to revisit. And truthfully, it was something that we had in mind before you came along, Dorothea, but it seemed to just make such good sense to have somebody who I knew visited the show and who was certainly familiar with Lyn's work and had sort of this pre-established relationship. It's really awesome to be able to sort of share the space and have create space for different voices to have these conversations. So thank you both so much for taking this on, and yeah, it's always wonderful to revisit this work. It did have 3 iterations, but there's more to say on it.
Yeah, well, thank to both of you for this. It's great. It's great to, you know, it's also wonderful to communicate with or be back and forth with Dorothea, who we have the former relationship of being in the classroom. So that was it was a real treat.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to everyone, and we will be posting this video up on our YouTube and then linking it back to the show page. So if you want to revisit it, please feel free. And thanks to everyone. Thanks, guys, and have a great evening.
Thank you for listening.